and against carried. You might as well stay there, Michael. Next one up is the report on the transport emission reduction pathway to come in May 2026.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a noting report which we've put in to advise that we intend to come back to the committee in 2 months with further detail on what we can do and what decisions we'd like from the Council, from the Transport Committee related to emissions reductions in the transport sector. So, open it up.
Cool. Any questions? It's moved by Alf. Is do you want a question, Morris? Or no, it hasn't come up yet. Unless your name is no speakers. It's not shown on ours. Don't call me a liar. I'll get upset. I'll get offended. There it is. Now it's here. Okay, Morris.
Okay, I'm going to try and combine, because I will take a call for speaking to it if I have to, but I'll try and combine them both, because I'm seriously concerned about what has happened with this paper. First of all, this paper was passed in May of last year, and what occurred on the day, because I've got a copy of the minutes from the day, is quite telling. The meeting broke up several times, and officials were trying to get to amend the original resolution. If you look on the paper we're considering today, 2D, it says request Auckland Transport and Auckland Council staff. But if you look at the minutes, you'll see the original motion that was recommended was just for Auckland Transport to come back and tell us what they thought were, listen to these words, what they believe were realistic measures they can implement and their associated emissions targets and how they can be delivered and how they will be funded. Now, Mr. Chairman, that was just the simple resolution that we would get back from Auckland Transport, their view of what was realistic. Because if there's anybody here in this room that believes the stuff that's sitting in TERP and got obligations on Auckland Transport right now, a halving of vehicle kilometres, more than a halving of vehicle kilometres travelled, a 550% increase in public transport use, a whole swag of stuff that is literally away with the fairies. I wanted Auckland Transport at least to come back to this committee and tell us what they thought was as it says. But officials scrambled around in this room and have got the times of how long it was delayed for, and then it was delayed further. We even went away for a lunch break. They finally moved a number of amendments, but it says here in the minutes, changes to the amendment were suggested by staff, however, they were not accepted by the mover and the seconder, and we finally ended up accepting the words and Auckland Council staff. And what I find aggravating is that that's what was passed unanimously by a committee of the whole council. And then nothing happened. Nothing. And so I went to Phil Wilson back in December last year and I said, this has been on the books since May. And he said, this is grossly unacceptable. I will make sure it's sorted. And it didn't. And it didn't move. And you may not like this particular resolution, you may not even like what it stands for, but I'm hoping every one of you is strongly supportive of that. If we pass some resolution, even one I don't like, unanimously, that the bare minimum staff have got an obligation is to bring that paper back saying it requires more work and we can't do it in the next meeting or the meeting after or the meeting after that. But to put up excuses here like, but other tasks and processes resulted in the item being delayed and then being delayed again, when it shouldn't have even been Auckland Council staff, and had the council staff not demanded that it be put in the amendment, the original amendment wasn't going to involve them. And if I hadn't taken this up with the Chief Executive back last year and then again this year, this would have disappeared. Had I not been re-elected in October, this was gone off the radar. There was no report back to us. There was no, we can delay this. And so the principle alone of the matter of how something is dealt with is at stake here. I'm angry about the specific issue not being reported back because now there won't be an Auckland Transport to report back on it. And so what we've got now, if you read the resolution, is it says, note that staff will report back. Staff will report back. Not Auckland Transport and council staff, but staff. So they got exactly what they wanted back in a year ago in May. We don't want Auckland Transport reporting back to you. At least Remember those words. What they believe are realistic measures they can implement and their associated emissions targets and how they can be delivered and how they will be funded. And I want to know, first of all, from Barry, Mr. Chairman, how many other issues, or sorry, I'll rephrase it, I'll get this right. Are there any other resolutions that have been passed by this committee that have not been brought back?
Not as far as I'm aware,
Right.
Councillor.
So my second question is, how would you ever be aware? Do you have a bring-up file?
The reports go back to the authors of the report, and they will bring those up and address the resolutions from the committee meeting.
So there is a bring-up process that would alert you to if something has been done and yet not taken back to the committee?
Not to me.
Well, I thought you were the lead officer for this committee.
I've just made it clear, they don't come through to me. It comes through, we have the Forward Work Program, which comes out, and of course the Forward Work Program is in the back of this month's reports, and that's where it goes into, is into that Forward Work Program.
Right, and could just disappear and never be seen again?
What's in the Forward Work Program, that's where it
Well,
appears.
Forward Work Program could be for the next 3 years. Because I'm seriously concerned about the process here. You have every right to come back to this committee in June or July or August or September, whenever, and say, look, that resolution that was passed on the 8th of May, it's got a lot of work. We're seeking from you an extension of 6 months before we report back on this. But not a mutter, not a murmur, not a whisper from anybody. And it just stayed on the books and stayed on the books, and now Auckland Transport is about to be completely dissolved, and now we're passing a resolution, which is what officials wanted on the day, that they can get to report to us what they think is realistic. Not Auckland Transport, that's gone from the bottom on the resolution, and I find that, and I hope that others will find it unacceptable, because they may be in that situation sometime in the future where something they think was important and they got passed by a committee and it just disappeared into the ether.
So I'll take on some of this. So there was a discussion at the end of it, Morris, and you and I talked about it. We've talked about it a couple of times, and you expressed to me your disappointment in the process and in me as chair, and fair cop. The reason it doesn't disappear, it sits in the Forward Work Program, and it does not disappear. There were three main reasons why this discussion was put off, and everyone did support it. Everyone was keen to have a review of TERP, no issue. And so it wasn't lost. And so the three reasons that generally, well, the three reasons why it was, and we discussed this, and I discussed this as chair with, at the time, with the staff as the best way forward. The staff that were going to be required to do this work are donkey and were donkey deep in the transport transformation and transition that is being required by the Act. The capacity for those staff to do this, which is a significant piece of work and is a serious chunk of Council and AT working together, the capacity for them to do it did not exist. And that was explained. Point number two, it is a funding aspect, and we hear all of the time in this room the unfunded mandate. And so that is one of the great criticisms of TERP. It is the thing that I have heard most about TERP while sitting in this room since becoming a councillor in whatever year it was, 2022 or whenever it was. So that is the thing. It becomes it's a funding document. The opportune time for us and the best time for us to now talk about TERP is the LTP time. It is the time for when actually the legislation work will have almost wound up. They're still donkey deep doing stuff because we don't know what the legislation is going to look like. But the right time to talk about TERP and the unfunded mandate, and there is the irony of arguing that there's unfunded mandates and then wanting changes potentially that would remain unfunded unless we have that discussion wrapped into the LTP. shouldn't be lost on people. So the ideal time is to do the work now, and that's what they are saying they're coming back to, as has been in our forward work program on every one of our agendas probably since that item. It is now they come back, they say, we will come back to you in May. We can start the discussion about TERP, which everybody wants to have, in the context of the LTP, so that we can potentially make changes and we can potentially align it with funding. And so we get away from where the criticism of it is now. And so that is why I sat there as chair and I discussed, and you've been a minister, so you know that you sit there in those leadership positions and you discuss with staff the next steps on things. That was the discussion. You and I have talked about it. You didn't agree, and that's fine. But that is where it is. It's coming back in May, and that is the time that we will be able to start having the discussion about TERP in detail. And so today is not the day to dive into that, just in case people are wanting to dive into TERP. We're not going to do that today, because this is an update to say to you, so that it doesn't get lost and you don't feel that it's been lost, to placate those fears, that it's coming back in May. And that is when you can dive deep, and we'll start the deep dive into TERP. And so, yep.
I want to respond to several of those. The first of all is the original request was for Auckland Transport. When I went down there the following week, and I said to Dean Kimpton and the board, how long would it take us to get that response back? He said, we're ready to go. We've got all of that material. We could furnish it back to the committee next month. So had officials from our staff not made it, and staff, if it had stayed as the original resolution, you would have had that recommendation back at the June meeting. The second thing is, this is not about changing TERP. None of the requests that we were asked for was, what do we do to change TERP? It was a start of a process about, what does Auckland Transport think is a realistic set of settings? And then we could say, well, actually, that's not too far away from where we are. We don't need to do much work, or we do. I accept that any change to TERP will only be relevant if we do it through the long-term plan. And when I said to Dean Kimpton, so why aren't you reporting that back? He says, council staff are stopping us. So I don't accept your line of, our people were so busy they couldn't get around to it. The original request, which was only changed because staff demanded it, would have been actually actioned back to us the following month. And you would have seen what Auckland Transport thought were realistic sums, and then we could have decided to move on. I agree with massive problem of changing TERP, having to go through a proper process, and finally I think the long-term plan is the only place it will be. I just don't accept that you can just put something like this on the back burner, and I'll finish this last one. It only took another meeting with Phil Wilson, and he literally said, this is grossly unacceptable, councillor, I will sort it out. And I'll pick up on your last comment. You said, I've been a minister. Let me tell you that if any decision had been through a cabinet committee and minuted about bringing a report back, any official that chose not to bring that report back because the minute had said so would be gone that day. They'd just be gone. They would come back to the cabinet committee and say, you agreed to a following, but we think it's too much work, and can we have a 3-month hiatus or whatever? It would not just be buried and gone. And so Phil Wilson said to me, I've finally dealt with it. Barry's going to come and see you again. We're going to get this back on the agenda. So I don't accept that this would have got back on the agenda at any rate. It's just a bit fortuitous that I met with Phil 10 days ago and it all moved on from there. And more importantly, I find it really galling that officials are saying, because they're so busy, it's taken this long, when they were the ones who injected themselves into the debate and did not need to be on the original request.
Ken, have you got a question, or are we into debate? Okay, so I'll move. Shane will second. Gentlemen, you can step back. Thank you for that. Right, Ken.
I just want to say, Mr. Chair, listening to everything and trying not to lay any blame anywhere or anything like that. The reason I voted for this thing was because it's obvious in council here that we have policies we've voted through, unfunded or otherwise, and the staff get bogged down in huge workloads because they have to consider all these things that in some cases are unworkable. And so that's why I supported going back and reviewing TERP, and the fact that it's taken 12 months and the workload problems we're talking about here, we could have released some of that if we had have acted quickly. So I just wanted to say that that's how I saw what was disappointing, kind of a compounding, self-fulfilling circle. Thank you.
Okay, any other comment? Oh, Mike.
We've heard quite a lot today about emissions, but not the type of emissions that the council, and I guess everyone has been concerned about over the last decade, which is greenhouse gas emissions. I think we also need to consider the nature of fuel emissions, not just the amount, but the quality of those emissions that we have in Auckland today. I recall in the Auckland Regional Council, and Councillor Williamson will remember this as a Member of Parliament and as a minister at certain stages, that we campaigned long and hard to upgrade the refining standards at Marsden Point to enable Euro, I think it was 3-4 standard fuel in New Zealand and the fleet to go with it. Before that time, in terms of PM10, we had thousands of parts per million in our fuel, and by 2009, thanks to persuading the government, we were down to 10 parts per million. There is a public health aspect to this, as well as a climate aspect to it, and I think that any report back should also ensure that, or check that we are still moving ahead in terms of the content of the fuel that we're currently using in New Zealand. I would also make the point too, compared to those days, apart from when we had thousands of parts per million being emitted into the atmosphere and people breathing them in, there were no EV vehicles, there's no electric vehicles or hybrids. Now about 10% of the fleet is. So we are improving in terms of the nature of vehicle emissions, but I think we need to ensure that we are getting the best quality fuel in terms of content, nitric oxide and all the rest of it, PM10s, as is available. So that could be part of the emissions, not just standard GHG emissions, though I'm sure all vehicle emissions are also GHG influencing. Thank you.
Oh, wrong one. Thank you, Mike. Okay, no other discussion. I'll move the motion. Those in favour say aye. And against? Carried. Okay, next one up is the